Pound of Flesh by Shembre. Chapter 17. Great kings, I'm no better than a simple, uninitiated cub. Baffled by her actions, or lack thereof, Vitani stalked home. Didn't I come here to kill that king? Simba was right there. Why didn't I slice my claws across his face, take his throat in my jaws, and wait his last gasp? Killing a full-grown lion isn't beyond my ability, so why didn't I move a muscle to kill Simba? Didn't I want to prove that Kovu's not the way to justice? All I did prove was that there's no place for us in the Pride Lands. Those fat, holier-than-thou lionesses cut that zebra's throat. But why do I even care? Vitani had blinked in disbelief when she'd seen Simba from a distance, alone. But as she'd crept closer, the more her curiosity had eaten at her. Questions burning within escaped, overshadowing her instincts. Simba had also looked quite mortal, digging his mother's grave. Vitani had pulled up very short indeed. Oh, how Simba must have gotten a kick out of her shock and awe when he told her that Kovu's fate had been one of care and not exile, and Zira had been entirely certain she'd forced her chosen one to watch Sarabi's murder. Indeed, she'd severely underestimated Simba. It had been the stupidest, most bestial thing they could have done. Kovu won't be on our side now. Wait! Vitani hesitated when she heard the frantic flap of wings behind her. She looked up, brow raised. Stop! A blue hornbill landed on the ground close to her, but not too close. The king wishes to speak to you, Vitani growled. What? She shook her head and snorted. I've nothing to say to him or his lionesses. Please, he insists. He can insist all he wants. Simba should be glad I didn't kill him then and there. The hornbill balked, fluffing his feathers. Why? Vitani snorted again, walking away. The bird followed. As unpleasant as you are, rogue, the king really doesn't say thanks. But no thanks. But no. Stop. Vitani, stop. The beats of paws on dirt and dry grass then made Vitani pause and turn. She snarled when Simba ran up to her side, slightly winded. Vitani took a few steps away from Simba. I've nothing to say to you, she snapped. Yes, you do. Why? Vitani's ears went back. Why do you even care? Why now? I've run out of time to not care. That is why. Now, what were you about to say when the lionesses came, Vitani? I'm surprised you even know my name, Vitani glowered. Regardless, nothing I can say matters. Why tell me that the outsiders are starving? It doesn't matter. Why tell me that your mother... Fine! Vitani bared her teeth. My brother Nuka is wounded beyond our ability to help him. Maybe I thought you could help. Simba blinked. His jaw went slightly slack. We're wasting our lives in the Outlands. Vitani went on without knowing why. No, she wanted her pride to survive. That was why. She couldn't lose Nuka. Zira only cared about what she thought Scar wanted. The very least Vitani could do was to not strike the first blow, but she would finish any fight Simba started with her. How did Nuka become injured? Simba asked seriously. Kovu, Vitani admitted plainly. Kovu clawed him when Nuka held him down. Simba thought for a moment. He ground his teeth. I want nothing more than to resolve this without violence, Vitani. I think you do too, considering that I'm still talking to you. I can help Nuka only if you agree to resolve the tension between our prides peacefully. Vitani flicked the end of her tail and smirked. Her eyes caught sight of the lionesses who had followed Simba. They looked confused. Feeling a rush of heat flush her face, Vitani jerked ahead at them. But what does anything matter when your pride hates us? We're all backstabbing, murdering rogues, and we know that. We know what we've done to you. Perhaps you're wasting your breath. The king's bird piped. Perhaps your brother deserves to die. Zazu, Simba growled, but a dark cloud passed over his hopeful expression. He glanced over his shoulder at the lionesses. What looked like pain stretched his features. I know bloodlust when I see it. She turned and started to walk away, but when Simba leapt in front of her, she had to stop herself from reflexively striking him. Let me by. What will happen now? He asked, voice strained. He reeked of desperation. She frowned. I don't know. But she did know what or who really stood between everyone and peace. Vitani moved to the right, and Simba blocked her. Get out of my way! Not until you answer me. That look in your eye, what are you planning? I don't answer to you, Vitani snapped. Now I need to go home and tell everyone that Kovu won't be our savior. In that instant, Vitani saw the reality of her position. Simba was begging for an alliance. His way of life, his very life, and the lives of his family were in her paws. Interesting. It's all come down to me. The king still looked devastatingly desperate as he flared his nostrils and narrowed his eyes. Gritting her teeth, she dodged past Simba, and they exchanged the snarl. We'll be ready for war, if that's what you decide. Simba shouted behind her. Vitani picked up her pace. She felt like she'd accomplished nothing. But now I know what must be done. Relief loosened Kovu's muscles when Simba finally returned, just before dark, not long after Kiara had snuggled beneath his aching arm. Digging Sarabi's grave had taken Simba and the lionesses longer than anticipated. The reason for the delay made Kovu tense up immediately. The angry, twisted knot lodged solidly in his gut grew. Vitani came back while I was burying Mother. Kovu sat up, his body stiff and sore. He muttered to Kiara, who was still at his side. I warned him they'd come back. Simba continued as everyone gathered around, a nervous vibe running through the cave. Vitani was hostile, Simba said, but she did not attack. She was there to find out what had happened to Kovu. Simba shook his head and looked vaguely frustrated. We talked and she went home. This changes everything for them. They know Kovu's here and wasn't exiled. The lionesses who had helped Simba looked at each other uneasily. You know what their plans are, to kill us. One of the lionesses grumbled. I don't understand why you had to chase after her like you did. Did you even learn anything? Kovu raised a brow when Simba railed against the lioness. I learned that she can use her mouth instead of her claws. Not all conflicts need to be settled with violence. A hatred-fueled war with the outsiders would be devastating. The last battle this pride saw was the coup against Scar and the hyenas. Simba lashed his tail. These are not snivelling hyenas lacking loyalty or conviction. As your king, I think I owe it to everyone to not lead you all to your deaths, if possible. Silence swept away anything anyone could say at that moment. For once, Kovu had a good idea of what the lionesses were thinking. Just like him, they'd waited and waited for Simba to act. They knew what they were in for. Simba's anti-violence stance frustrated Kovu to no end. Kovu had already tried the path of diplomacy, and it had not worked. Nala moved to her mate's side. Simba looked around. I have done nothing about the outsiders, and I have let you suffer in quiet terror. Then what will you do, Simba? One lioness asked, her tone quiet but restrained. Simba lowered his eyes to his paws. Kovu sighed when the king lowered his ears too and said, I think now only time will tell, but that does not excuse what I have not done. If Vitani keeps communication open, why do you want to deal with a backstabbing outsider? They'd kill every one of us the first chance they got. Communication with heathens is entirely pointless. I'm tired of sitting here. We could attack them next time they hunt on our lands. Kovu shook with anger as the lionesses berated their king. This will get worse before it even begins to get better. This will never end. Kiara rested a paw on Kovu, which kept his images of Sarabi's death at bay, kept them from flooding his consciousness. His shaking abated slightly, but every muscle still buzzed with uneasy energy. Cries of frustration flew at Simba, but the words that finally got to him were, Your father would have never. Simba's roar filled up the den. Enough! Every eye was on the king, who was puffed up with frustration. Enough! This is the kind of hatred that has gotten us into this. He lashed his tail and gritted his teeth, his eyes flitting from one displaced face to another. Simba, remember yourself, Nala quietly warned her mate. She then turned to her lionesses. We are a pride. Don't make an enemy out of your king when he has done no harm to you. The lionesses grumbled for a moment, but fell quiet again when Nala glared daggers at them before she turned to her mate again and said something to him that Kovu couldn't hear. Whatever she'd said made Simba's troubled gaze dart over to Kovu and Kiara. Simba came over to Kovu and Kiara. Although the worry didn't leave the king's eyes, he smiled genuinely at his daughter. His attention then turned on to Kovu. Kovu, how are you feeling? I've been better, he muttered. Kovu looked at his paws. He was still reeling from the murder and knew the road to recovery would be long. He looked at the lionesses behind Simba. The same old looks of unconcealed suspicion, and maybe there is even a hint of jealousy tossed in. I'm just glad you're here, son. Simba rested a paw on Kovu's shoulder where his flesh was relatively wound-free. And I'm sorry I lost my temper when you went to see Zira. Kovu swallowed. I'm sorry that I went. Simba's smile faltered. Hey, we all make mistakes. And you'll always belong here, regardless. Kovu felt terrible that he'd even thought that Simba would turn against him, but now he knew for sure that Simba's affection wasn't superficial. Kovu tucked his chin into his mane. I hate them so much for what they did to Sarabi. He shook his head. I'm surprised Vitani didn't kill you. She was looking for help from Nuka. Kovu's eyes widened. He emitted a snarl. Do you know why? Simba nodded. And what did you say to that? I still sought a peaceful solution with the outsiders. Kovu's mouth screwed up in anger. His sore muscles tensed. Kovu, Simba began. Kovu, all the outsiders are just desperate. Kiara said at the same time. And hurt. Kovu frowned. He glanced at Simba, who looked equally confused. I mean, Kiara looked bashful and reflective. I remember all the times that Kovu lashed out at me and the lionesses. It seemed like he was hurt and didn't know any other way to react. Why wouldn't the outsiders be any different? Aren't they angry they were exiled? Aren't they angry that they're starving? Kovu's immediate reaction was to say that he wasn't anything like the outsiders, but deep down he knew he was still too much like them to admit that he wasn't. Even though he knew it was nobody's fault but Zira's, that her pride had stayed in the outlands instead of moving to better land. Kovu thought it was very possible that Kiara was right. The outsiders may be killers, but they aren't made of stone. I'm not sure, Kiara, Simba said doubtfully with a glance at Kovu. Well, why did Scar have so much hate? Kiara blinked. Father, Scar wasn't born with darkness in his heart. He wasn't even born with the name Scar. His name was Taka, right? I refuse to believe that someone could be born evil. Maybe Zira was. Either way, I will probably never know why she is the way she is. Kovu paused as another thought came to him. Only Kiara could look at her enemies with any shred of empathy, while the rest of us would gladly tear any of the outsiders to pieces at this moment. I think we could use more of her wisdom. Hate begets hate, right? Simba pursed his mouth. I don't entirely know why Scar's heart was filled with darkness. The flash of a look that played out on Simba's face for a second made Kovu think otherwise, however. Kiara flicked her ears. Well, if you think Vitani wants to talk, Daddy, let her talk. I wouldn't let everyone bully you into a war, she added. Just yet, at least. Simba looked uncertain again, but Kovu knew he appreciated having an ally in his daughter. Nala then came up behind her mate and nuzzled him. They calmed down a bit, she reported. Simba rolled his eyes. Good. Simba, Nala said. She jerked her head towards the den entrance. Why don't we have a talk outside? Deflating a bit before tensing up again, Simba nodded. Yes, Nala. He turned with her and looking over his shoulder at Kovu and Kiara. Get some rest. He hesitated for a moment before he said quietly, Kovu, I'm glad I didn't lose you too. As Simba followed Nala out of the den, Kovu took a deep breath. What was Vitani up to? Why hadn't she killed Simba, even if she needed him to help Nuka? So far, Vitani had brought Kovu nothing but misery. She'd called him home with assassination orders, bound the Pride Lands, participated in holding him hostage, and had helped murder Sarabi, and yet she'd had a conversation with Simba. And even more so, Simba hadn't torn her to shreds either. Kiara moved closer to Kovu. Kovu, breathe. You took in a breath, but you never let it go. With a cough, Kovu exhaled. You alright? I'll live. When Kiara lowered her ears, Kovu realized what she'd actually asked. Just trying to make sense of the situation, he murmured. Kiara smiled. We all are. She nuzzled him again. So much has happened so quickly, she said. You need to keep resting. I don't think I can sleep, but I'm so exhausted. Just lay your head down, Kovu. I'm here. With a grunt, Kovu's head met the hard stone beneath him. There was no point in arguing. His body ached so much. Kiara laid her paw over his outstretched foreleg. Just rest, Kovu. Vitani swiped her tongue over her blood-smeared muzzle. She left the impala to the buzzards. It had been sickly anyway, and someone had been bound to pick it off within a day or two. Where have you been, Vitani? Her mother asked when she entered the den. Nuka was calling for you. Vitani walked up to her brother. She nuzzled him, expecting to roust him. Instead, his head fell limply. For a moment she stared. Why wasn't he moving? Then she realized the horrible truth, and her heart just about tore itself in half. She shook with grief. Vitani, where have you been? Zira insisted. She came to Vitani's side without even acknowledging the body that had once been her firstborn child. Her teeth gritted, and through teary eyes Vitani snapped, Doing what Kovu and you won't do. What? Zira's eyes widened. She looked directly at Vitani. You mean? Vitani nodded. What a vile creature that stood before her. Yes, mother. Scar's murderer is dead. I killed Simba for you. This was more than a last straw. Her mother's action had led Nuka into death's pan, whether he had known it or not. Kovu's claws had created the wound, but Kovu had acted in self-defense, and Nuka had died calling out for his sister. She'd loved nobody more than her wretched brother. Had he also gone without even a bit of comfort from Zira? Vitani assumed that much. Zira could hardly contain herself. The lionesses in the den started to yammer in disbelief. "Simba is dead. Simba is dead. Simba is dead," they repeated, unable to grasp that something they'd waited so long for had finally been achieved. As Vitani listened, the volume of their voices seemed to lessen, to fade into the background. She nodded again. "Yes." Her heart beat quickly and her breathing felt laboured. "I'll even show him to you, mother." She raised her chin. Before Vitani knew it, she was tracking back into the Pride Lands, leading Azira to a corpse that did not exist. Vitani had told the other lionesses to stay behind. This was between Zira and Simba, she told them, and they would talk later. "How dare you go against Scar?" Zira was saying. "What were you thinking?" she followed Vitani. Vitani thought her heartbeat would have taken on a quicker pace, but instead it just thudded harder. Thud. 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 She had to strike fast. "I guess I wasn't thinking. But we're very desperate, mother, don't you see? Vitani, I do not appreciate how you went against Scar's wishes." Zira went on. "But I must say, I'm quite proud of you. Now, how much further? I cannot wait to see that marvelous work you have done, my daughter." Stopping, Vitani poked her ears and looked around. "It's close. It's close by. Right. Yes. Over there, mother." Zira gave a cubbish laugh that made Vitani's fur crawl. "Perfect." Zira started to head in the direction Vitani had gestured to with her nose. As Zira walked past up from behind Vitani and came up next to her, Vitani's paw slammed into the side of Zira's head. End of chapter 17.